My name is Trevor Steele, and in today's video, I want to review some paramotor launches and landings, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's get started. In this first video, we can see the guy's running. Inflation looks great, by the way. He's still running. No throttle's been applied. He's still running, and the wing dips. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things right here. When you go to do a forward launch, especially in light and variable conditions, you do not want to take a long time before you get into that throttle. You do not want to hesitate. You want to get that wing up as soon as you've double-checked, confirmed, wing is above you, everything is good, and you're ready to go. Hit the throttle. If you wait, you run the risk of the wing stalling or spinning behind you and ruining the launch. And the thing with forward launches that I've learned is that most people only have half a dozen attempts in them. Most people only have the energy to really want to try half a dozen times. And so it's important that you make every single one of them count. As soon as that wing comes up and is above you and is also straight, right? It's above him. It wasn't off to either side. It was perfectly ready to go. Go. Hit the throttle. Do not sissy around with that throttle. Do not hesitate on that throttle. Get into it and go. Now we keep going. We see he runs under the wing, and it's about right here that he gets into the throttle. Now he's running with the throttle. Now he's actually gotten into the throttle, but think about how many steps he's had to run, and think about how much time has happened now since he inflated the wing before he got into the throttle. It's probably better that you wait longer to get into the throttle than get into it too soon, but what you don't want to do is wait so long that you never get into the sky. So we can see he's now running, he's starting to get off the ground, and he pops off the ground, but he comes back down. Let's make note of one thing. When it's time to get off of the ground, what you want to do is pull a fair amount of brakes, maybe 4-6 inches of brakes, to pop you off the ground at the very end. Then you want to hold that until you've climbed about 5 to 10 feet. Then you very slowly put those brakes back up at the rate in which you stop climbing or sinking. So you want to pull those brakes to pop off the ground, right? That way you don't run forever. You pop off the ground a little bit sooner, making the launch easier, climb up about 5 to 10 feet, then you very slowly put those hands back up to zero brake, and then you climb away. It's important that you do put those hands back up slowly, not quickly, because if you just threw those hands up off takeoff, if you right here threw those hands up after pulling the brake to pop off the ground, he would dive right back into the ground and he would inevitably kind of crash land, right? So you want to pull those brakes, hold those brakes, pop off the ground, and then slowly put those brakes back up. He continues flying away, and that is a successful launch. Okay, let's take a look at video 2. You can see the pilot does a very nice inflation. It's slightly off to the side, but he corrects for it. Let's take a look at something right here. It is very easy for people when they're forward launching, forward kiting, or any of those forward techniques to get super deep into brakes without even realizing it. If you look at his right hand, you can see he's pulling like a foot and a half of brake, and that is super easy to do if you're not paying attention. So it's important that you pay attention to how much brake you're pulling anytime you're doing a forward launch or forward kiting. We keep going. He gets into that throttle, and let's take a look at this posture right here. So he's gotten into that throttle, and notice that the thrust is still pushing him down, right? He needs to lean a little bit farther back. Ideally, with the thrust line, you have the thrust pushing you upwards, which means you have to lean quite far back. Now, as new pilots, that's very uncomfortable because you have to, in a way, learn to trust the thrust pushing you, because your natural instinct is to do the running, when the reality is you shouldn't be doing any running. You should just be skipping off the ground by being pushed from the motor. It's a tricky technique that takes some practice to get. We keep watching, and this is where things get a little bit gnarly. You can see he just jerks his brakes down, throws them up, dives back at the ground, and then climbs back up. This is exactly what I was talking about in the last example, and that is that when you pull brakes to get off the ground, by the way, that was way too much brake. You should never just pump brakes. Brake pull should never be a jerky, quick motion, flying or kiting. Anytime that you do pull brakes to get off the ground, it's important that they don't get thrown back up, right? So you saw he pulled those brakes, popped up, and then dove back down. That's because his hands went up. He was able to catch it before he hit the ground. He stuffed some brake and flew away, and he was just fine. But it's important that when you do pull those brakes to get off the ground, that you hold those brakes down till you're about 5-10 feet, and then very slowly put your hands back up. To know if you're doing a good job when it comes to flying paramotors or paragliders, everything should be smooth and calm. If it's jerky like this, you're probably doing something wrong. So now we see he flies away and did just fine. Okay, let's take a look at video number 3. The pilot goes, runs. Inflation, it comes up slightly sideways. I want to make note of one thing right here. So I'm a big advocate of taking a look at the wing tip, just a quick glance to the side like he's doing right here, on inflation in light wind. The reason I'm a big advocate for that is because the information that the wing tells you, the information coming through the lines, the risers, the telephone poles going down to you, the person telling you what's going on, is delayed. And in light enough wind, it's delayed enough that you sometimes can't make a correction. So if you notice right off the bat, like the wing is coming up slightly sideways, look at the low side wingtip. The reason you want to look at the low side wingtip is because you typically change direction and walk under the low side wingtip. If you're looking at it, you're right, you're looking to the left, you end up walking to the left. So I like having him look quickly at that left wingtip, making that correction. We can see he does run a little left, he gets it under control, but notice by here, he still hasn't hit the throttle. Like I mentioned earlier in the first example, it's important that once you get going and that wing is above you, that you hit that throttle and go for it. You either got to commit or don't. There is no halfway commitment with a forward launch. He keeps running, he kind of trips on a bush right here, but he manages to keep going. The one thing that I will make note with this launch before we talk about what happens right here is that when you do get into that throttle, it is get in and go. It is not halfway, slowly work your way in. It is work your way to full and hold, baby. You want to get all that power and you want to get it as fast as possible. That way it can accelerate you and get you off the ground. Now let's talk about why he took off going to the right. If we look very closely, we can see his right hand is slightly lower than the left hand. This individual came through my advanced training course. This is where the video is filmed. And one thing that we worked on was symmetrically pulling brake. If you're right-handed, if you're more dominant in your right hand, or maybe your left hand, you'll pull more of that hand. So he was very good at pulling more right brake on launch and more right brake on landing because he was right-handed. His right hand is more dominant than his left hand. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the brake pull and that you're pulling consistently on both sides, right? Symmetrically on both sides. He flies away, no big deal, off into the sunset. Let's talk about video number 4. We can see the pilot goes, runs, beautiful inflation. Nothing's going wrong, but I want to make note of one thing right here. You could tell the pilot is running directly down the runway and the wing is coming slightly crosswind to the left. Unless you're intentionally trying to do a crosswind launch like he was intentionally trying to, it is best that you run directly into the wind. Everything else of this launch looks good, other than he could lean back a little bit further. I want to make note of what happened right there, right? He took off and then he dove to the right. Why did that happen? Same thing that the last pilot did in the last video, he just did. He pulled more right brake than left brake, causing him to take off going to the right. That's okay depending on how much you pull, because what could happen is you could pull more right brake than you think, causing you to kind of dive over to the right back into the ground, which would be no fun for anybody. It's important that you flare symmetrically. Both brakes come down at the same time, at the same rate, to the same spot, popping you off the ground. Okay, let's talk about some landings. In this first video, the pilot is coming in nicely. He's out of the seat, no oscillation, and he flares a little too fast and balloons up. So one thing that is very, very common for new pilots to do is what I call a balloon. And that is where, as you're approaching the ground, you pull too much brake too quickly and it pops you up and away from the ground. Now, if you do this on a very extreme case, which this particular video is not, that could end up being you're full flared 5 feet out of the sky and the only thing left to do is to basically drop into the ground. It is important that you do not balloon to your best ability. The reason a lot of people balloon is because they get this ground rush. They get scared of the ground. They get scared of like slamming into the ground, which is a very common thing if you're staring at the ground. And so they pull brakes too quickly. Slow down that flare. An ideal flare is where you pull just enough to kind of round out, You let the wing glide, 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 and then you full flare at the very end right before you set down. We see he waits, punches down, lands pretty softly, and then he turns around the wrong direction. It is super important that when you're flying a paramotor, whether on a launch or on a landing, that you do not turn around the wrong direction. You want to turn the shortest way. You want to turn in a way that keeps that prop away from those lines at all times. The way I think of that propeller and the way I explain that propeller to any new pilot is it is a spinning samurai sword. And the reason I say that is because when you visualize all of those nice fragile little lines that are coming out of the sky, if you put that samurai sword into those lines, you're gonna go chop, 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 right? So it's important that you wanna keep that prop facing away from that wing at all times. If that wing is falling to the left, turn and look at it. Turn the short way, just turn to the left and look at it, putting your back away from the wing. If that wing is falling to the right, turn to the right and look at it. Don't go the long ways, as I call it. Don't put that prop anywhere near those lines. Although, if the motor's off, there's no risk. It's the habit that matters. And that also matters when you're kiting. Even if you're kiting and you usually turn around your left shoulder, let's say, and that wing starts to fall to the right, guess what? You should turn right, because every single time you do something, you build a habit, and it's important that even when you're practicing, even when there's no motor, you do it the right way, because it'll pay off when there is a motor. Okay, let's look at video number 2. Pilot is coming in nicely. Again, no oscillation, no rocking back and forth. That's super important, and I'll talk about that in a second. Comes in, balloons just a little bit, then punches it all down at the very end. But there's one thing I want to note, and that is right here. The thing that I really want to talk about right here is the fact the wing overflew him. This is something that happens to like a lot of people, and it's a very simple fix, you could say, and there's a simple reason as why I think you shouldn't do this. The most damaging thing to a wing is crashing onto its leading edge, or the very front of the wing where the cell openings are. That is going to do the most harm over a long-term effect of your wing's lifespan. And so the less that you can, set the wing down on its leading edge, the better. You can see this wing overflew him. The reason it overflew him is because when he landed, he stopped. It is important that when you set down, you continue to run forward, holding the brakes as deep as you can until you turn around and set the wing down softly. A very successful landing also includes a very successful set down. If the set down is not good, that is going to lower your ranking on the landing. Okay? It's important that the set down is good. Okay, let's talk about video number 2, right? We have this guy coming in a little bit lower than a normal pilot. He's starting to work on these lower launches. Lower landings. He slowly eases off that throttle, kills the motor, and he's gliding in to the left. Let's talk about that real quick. Very commonly do new pilots not have a good ability to hold a heading. And by that, I mean I'm into the wind and he is turning to the left, which means he's not holding his heading. Now, the reason it's super important that you land directly into the wind. Launching, you can launch crosswind, but landing, you don't want to land crosswind, because every degree, every angle, every ounce of off center you are on landing makes the landing harder, makes the intensity more, makes the set down harder, makes the run faster, makes everything worse. And most importantly, if you land slightly crosswind, the wing is going to be pulling you sideways, which is going to put you off balance and lead to you falling over, possibly falling over. So it's very, very, very important that you work on landing directly into the wind. The very first thing I have new students work on is what I call a practice approach. That's where you go up, I'm standing into the wind from you, you glide towards me, and you work on holding that heading all the way down until 15 feet, then you throttle up and go around. One thing that I see that leads to a successful landing is a successful approach. If you have a good approach, if you're good at bringing yourself in, you will more than likely have good landings. He continues, hammers all those brakes, and sets down, just like the last video, came down sideways. Let's talk about video number 4. The pilot here is coming in a little bit oscillating. You can see him rocking back and forth. He floats up to his left and then kind of slams down to his right. Now, oscillation is arguably the most important thing to keep under control on landing. Reason being is if that oscillation had been ever so slightly worse, he would have just gotten slammed down to his right, which would have caused him to fall over, break a cage piece, break a prop, just would have been an unpleasant experience. It's important that when you are new, you learn to keep that oscillation under control. The two times that oscillation matters the most in order is landing, that's the most important, and launching. Both times, if you're oscillating, if your wing is rocking back and forth, it can cause you to swing up and back into the ground. That is it for this video. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and if you want to be featured in the next video, go ahead and reach out to me and we will review your video in the next video. If you're interested in training or equipment, check us out at backcountryppg.com. We have every piece of equipment, parts, accessories, and more. We also offer beginner and advanced training. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.